The world's cheapest international flight is Singapore to Malaysia. It also happens to be the third busiest international route operating anywhere in the world. But exactly how cheap is cheap? I've decided to fly from Singapore to Kuala Lumpur and back again today to test out the world's cheapest international flight and to see whether you can actually travel to another country and back again for less than the price of a domestic flight back home. So, a return economy fare between Melbourne and Sydney today, I actually looked this up a couple of weeks ago, if I was doing it today, would cost me 474 Australian dollars return. So I'm going to give myself $474 to spend today on everything, on airfares, on food, on transport when I get to KL, to see if I can do it cheaper than a standard domestic Melbourne to Sydney back in Australia. Just regular, thanks.
Regular hot oatmeal latte.
Yes, please. $9.10. In Singaporean dollars as well, so that is $10.27 Australian. So I'm going to savour this. So my flight over to Kuala Lumpur from here in Singapore is actually with AirAsia, and I managed to book a flight for $129.95. Now off that, $113.18 was taxes, but it is a lot more expensive flying out of places like Singapore than you'll see it will be flying out of Kuala Lumpur to come back to Singapore later this afternoon. Now I've just booked the base economy fare with AirAsia, so I haven't got any bags to check in, so I don't need to pay for those. I've only got a backpack. But it also means you can't select your seat. So I get assigned a seat when I check in, and I was actually assigned a middle row seat, which out of all the seats that you can sit on a plane, window is obviously the best. Aisle comes second. Middle seat is the worst possible option. So I'm going to go across the gate and ask very nicely and see if they can maybe give me a seat near the window instead. Fingers crossed.
Yes, sir.
Hello, is it possible to ask about a change of seat at all?
Any changes of seat is chargeable, sir.
How much would it be to
And today is a full flight, no seat.
All right.
No seat available.
Okay. All right, no worries. Thank you.
Hello, good morning.
Well, this is my home for the next hour, 36E, right in the middle of, I'm not sure who my neighbours are going to be. I will meet them shortly. I just keep telling myself that if I would have paid to be able to choose where I sit on this flight, then that's less money I have to actually spend in Kuala Lumpur. So this is good. This is fine. This is why we're here. I waved goodbye to my beloved window seat, said hello to my new seat companions either side of me, who then promptly fell asleep for the entire short flight all the way over to Kuala Lumpur.
Tuan-tuan dan puan-puan, izinkan kami mengingatkan anda bahawa merokok adalah dilarang sama sekali di dalam penerbangan ini.
As this is the base economy fare, obviously there's no food or drink that you get as part of your flight ticket, but like other low-cost carriers with AirAsia, you can order from the pretty extensive food and drinks menu that they have on board. The only thing is though, whatever you do order, you have to eat quite quickly, because as you can see from the flight radar data, once we've climbed out of Singapore, we only reach about 23,000 feet. Hold that cruise level for about 5 minutes before immediately starting our descent down into Kuala Lumpur. Before you really have time to think, and before the poor kid 2 rows in front of me had time to finish his ramen noodles, he was still eating those whilst we were taxiing at Kuala Lumpur. The speed brakes are deployed and we do start our descent into Malaysia.
Dear guests, we have landed at Kuala Lumpur International Airport, Terminal 2. On behalf of our Asian, Captain Changi, we would like to say thank you for flying with us.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Malaysia. Made a bit of a mistake though. I forgot that I needed to do a Malaysian digital arrival card before coming into the country, which is fine. You can do it on your phone. It's really, really quick. But yeah, but it costs $52.27. So that's got to be added to my total. And now we've got even less for lunch. So now I need to get into town from the airport, and I could get a Grab or a taxi, but that's going to be too expensive and it's going to blow out my budget. So instead, what I think I'm going to do is try the airport rail link, the KLIA Express, which apparently is down here. Okay, so just quickly, we have jumped out here at KL Central, but I'm going to jump on another train and go to KLCC. That is so cool. I've never been here before. It's great. Petronas Towers. So I was trying to look on the flight on the way here. I was trying to think about the reasons why this is the cheapest international flight in the world. And I think to work that out, you've got to look at the reasons why people are travelling between Singapore and KL. Well, first of all, there's obviously the historical connection between Malaysia and Singapore. And so families who reside in both areas are going to want to be able to travel to see each other. But then again, because of that historical connection, obviously the trade benefits and the trade connections between the two countries are very, very strong. And so there's a lot of corporate travel that goes between the very prosperous cities of Singapore and Kuala Lumpur. But then, of course, you've got to look at the fact these are two major cities. They're less than an hour apart from each other. So the leisure business between the two is huge. Now, because of that high demand, I was then looking at all the airlines that fly between KL and Singapore to obviously try and commercially benefit from that. First of all, AirAsia, obviously, who I flew with on the way here. Scoot, which is the budget airline of Singapore. Batik Air, which is part of Lion Air, they're an Indonesian airline. Firefly, which is part of the Malaysian aviation group. You've even got Ethiopian Airlines, I discovered, who do fly between Singapore and KL. Not only do they do that, but they do it on a 787 Dreamliner. Now, obviously this works well if you're travelling from Ethiopia to KL. You can just hub via Singapore, but it also means that they can pick up some of that additional leisure traffic that is travelling between the two cities whilst they've got their bigger airline in Singapore already. And that demand is a huge reason why those airlines are operating the routes, and then the competition from those airlines is a big reason why the fares are so cheap. And the airlines are actually running at a pretty high load factor as well. The load factor is just basically the amount of seats on the aircraft that's been sold. So if the entire aircraft is full, you've got a load factor of 100%. And Singapore Airlines are operating on this route at a load factor of 85.2%. And Scoot, their budget arm, is all the way up at 91% load factor. With so much demand for travel between the two cities, and with them being separated by only a few hundred kilometres, you may wonder why Malaysia and Singapore haven't considered a high-speed rail link. Well, it turns out they did. Back in 2010, Malaysia and Singapore both agreed to build a 350 kilometre long high-speed rail link to link Kuala Lumpur and Singapore. Trains would be travelling around 320 kilometres an hour, and you could get between the two cities in just 90 minutes. But after some government changes, some budget issues, the project was postponed, with both sides unable to agree on terms by the end of 2020. Unfortunately, the high-speed rail project was officially terminated on the 1st of January 2021. Probably much to the delight of all the airlines that fly between these two cities. This is lovely, this little park area here in the middle of KLCC, or Kuala Lumpur city centre, this park is. Plenty of shady spaces to sit, lots of places to get food. There's a little water park for the kids to play in as well. It's very cool. Oh, it's not open yet, but apparently, I was going to sound all knowledgeable there, apparently the MotoGP's coming to KL this year. I didn't know that. I do now. After taking some pretty epic selfies outside the front of the Petronas Towers, because I still had a few hours before having to go back to the airport, I just took a bit of a walk around KL. I was getting pretty hungry at this stage, so I did decide to stop for some lunch. I do admit, it's not very Malaysian, but no, it was cheap and it's nice. Because that sushi didn't really fill me up, I decided then to have some tacos as well. I always wanted to ride the KL monorail, so I did that. But before long, it was then time to jump back onto the KL Express and head back to the airport. As you can tell, I'm back at the airport now. This is KLIA Terminal 2, the same terminal we came into. I was looking at the departures board, and it's basically 95% AirAsia flying out of here, and a very little bit of the other airline, and that's Scoot. Now, remember when I was saying that those airport taxis coming out of Singapore were really high, which is what gave us quite a high airfare compared to the average flights between Singapore and KL? On the way home, it's slightly different, because the airport taxis coming out of Malaysia are a lot lower. And my airfare on Scoot to get back to Singapore now cost me $33.13. And of that, the taxis were actually just over $23. So if you take out the airport taxes entirely, this airfare from Kuala Lumpur back to Singapore is going to cost me less than $10. But of course you have to pay the taxis, but even still, $33 for a one-way fare between these two cities. No wonder the average airfare between the two is somewhere around that $65 mark. So the nice thing about flying on Scoot is, if like me you're a Singapore Airlines KrisFlyer and you've got appropriate status, so I'm a KrisFlyer Silver level member, you get some additional perks that you don't normally get if you just book a normal economy fare on this flight. So even though we only paid $33 to fly on this flight, I still get the option of choosing where I want to sit, because that's one of the benefits of being a KrisFlyer Silver member. So on the way home, I booked a window seat. Just clocked as well, that's a Dreamliner. So just like Ethiopian who fly a Dreamliner between Singapore and KL, apparently so does Scoot. As I made my way along the air bridge ready to board the flight, I did notice that our poor 13-year-old Dreamliner was losing a little bit of paint off the top of its fuselage. And I made my way over to my much-loved window seat and settled in for the flight. It feels very weird being on a plane this big when you know you're only doing a 55-minute flight now. As the rain started to fall and we made our way out to the runway, it did remind me of one very interesting point about Kuala Lumpur and its 3 parallel runways. Now, runways at airports are all named individually, and they're named based on 2 things. First of all, the magnetic orientation. So in our case, all 3 runways at KL face 320 degrees magnetic. So the first part of the runway names would be 32. But ordinarily, every time you have 3 runways all facing the same direction, the one on the left is called left, the one on the right is called right, and the one in the center, is called center. Not the case here in KL. The runway on the right is 32 right, but the runway in the middle is actually 32 left. And the runway on the far left is actually runway 33, even though it faces in the same direction as the 2 other runway 32. And if you're ever flying through KL and you wonder why this is the case, it's actually for future-proofing the airport. The Civil Aviation Authority of Malaysia have had a plan to build a 4th runway, and if they do decide to go ahead and do that, it's going to be another parallel runway facing towards 320 degrees. So if they do end up having 4 runways, because you can't have a 32 left, a 32 right, another 32 left, and another 32 right. And according to international standards, you can only have left, centre, and right. There's no other option. When the new runway on the left of the airport was built to support the new Terminal 2, they actually decided to call this 33, thinking that if the new runway does get built, 33 will become 33 right, and the new runway will become 33 left. As we departed out of Malaysia and the Scooty started the very quick in-flight service for this very short flight back to Singapore, I did start to wonder how frequently a 787 Dreamliner was being used on this very cheap international route. So I downloaded some recent data from Flight Radar, and it actually works out that 44% of the time a 787-9 Dreamliner is being used on this route, and 22% of the time it's a 787-8. So actually, it's the majority of the time that Scoot are using a 787 Dreamliner to fly this route between KL and Singapore. And if you take out taxes for a second, the fact that you can get that international flight for $9 has got to make this the cheapest international flight that I've ever flown, at least on a Dreamliner in my life. But just as we reached our cruise level of 27,000 feet, it was immediately time to start our descent into Singapore again. And all that was left was to answer the big question then. Is it possible to fly from Singapore internationally to Kuala Lumpur, have a fun day out exploring this new city, and then fly all the way home again back to Singapore for less than the cost of a domestic return between Sydney and Melbourne?
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Singapore. Please announce that we have...
Yes, quite easily actually, and even with one expense that I forgot about, which was my eSIM for data roaming. That was $5.61 for the day. The total I spent was $264.08. And if you are ever in Singapore or Kuala Lumpur in the future, if you've got a day spare and you haven't visited the other city, whichever one you're not in, and you've got a few $100s to spare, I would thoroughly recommend doing that. What a great day. All right, I'm back in Singapore, going to go through immigration. Thanks to us for watching, really appreciate the support, and I'll see you on the next flight.